This session, although in spite of what it says on the board out there, it says from 12:30 to 1:45, it's from 12:30 to 2 o'clock because you need an hour and a half PM credits for ethics. And so to meet your ethical obligations, you need to be here until 2 o'clock. And so I'm glad that you're here. I'll introduce, and there is Ray.
Sorry.
All right, all good. Our panel members for this session. I'm Merle Bishop. I'm currently working for Panoni, which has an office in Winter Haven, formerly with the city of Winter Haven. Also with us is Ray Chiramonte with Realtor Associates with a Tony Everett Company, formerly the executive director of T-BARTA and formerly the executive director of the Tampa City County Planning Commission. And Valerie Hubbard, director of planning with Ackerman, and Valerie is former AIC commission president. And Sylvia Vargas, who is a principal planner with Calvin Bordeno and Associates, and she currently serves on the AICP Commission. So, in order to qualify for ethics credit, we need to talk about ethics and the code. And so I'm going to get into that. This is the agenda that we're going to cover today. Why do we need to even be here? Why do you need ethics credits in the first place? Why do we need ethics? And a refresher on the code and planning ethics, and then there are 8 scenarios that we're going to present this scenario, and we're going to ask for your thoughts, your input, your your answers or your beliefs on what's going on here and what the situation involves and what the person should do. So we want to interact with you, and that means that as we go through these, we might not get through all 8, but we're going to go hopefully we can. We're going to go as far as we can, depending upon how much discussion that we get. So, so I invite you to ask questions and give us your opinions as we go through these. We're not going to wait till the end for questions. This is going to be a discussion session with you. So you can see the ethical scenarios up there, and we're going to get into those. Disclaimer I have to give is that this session's been created to provide general education regarding the AICP Code of Ethics. Although ethical scenarios and question and answer sessions are an important part of illustrating the application of the code's provisions, all certified planners should be aware that only the AICP Ethics Committee is authorized to give formal advice. And if you have a specific question regarding a situation that you have or that you're concerned about, or that you're concerned with a colleague or something happened, that you need to seek guidance on, you need to call the AICP ethics officer and seek informal or formal, advice regarding that. So again, why are we talking about ethics? I mean, it's something we deal with on a daily basis. We're confronted with either in a personal life or a professional life, in terms of making choices and making decisions. So it's important that we know our ethical obligations. Different people, I mean, you can ask, everybody in this room probably has different opinions about certain situations, so there's different thoughts and ideas about ethics and what constitutes ethical behavior. Distinction between right and wrong, as we all know, it's not always clear. It rarely is black and white. Situations where the line between right and wrong is blurred can often result in an ethical dilemma. Well, if I do this, then this. Or what if I do this, then this? And so we were confronted with those choices. So we need to have attitude. So when those situations arise, that it's easier for us to make the ethical choice and the right decision. Without having a refresher on ethics, sometimes we can lose sight of what our ethical obligations are, and it's easier to get caught in a trap, or it's easier to get on that slippery slope that one decision leads to another bad decision that leads to another bad decision. Suddenly you find yourself, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Realizing that if you'd have done the right thing to begin with, you wouldn't be there, right? Maybe we've all been there to a certain extent. So it's also important that we have an awareness of our ethical obligations, because as planners, I think for our profession and for the work we do, it's important that the people we work for, the people we work with, have an expectation and have confidence in what we do constitutes ethical behavior. I mean, I always, one of the reasons that I am a promoter of AICP is because I know that those credentials have a code of ethics behind it. And so hopefully the public, our employers, whether it be a local government or a consulting firm, know that they can rely upon our ethics and our ethical choices and behavior. The ethical environment for planners. Ethical judgment often requires a conscientious balancing based on the facts and context of a particular situation and the precepts of the entire code of ethics and professional conduct. Again, it's not always black and white, so that is the environment that we work in. And we passed out copies of the Code of Ethics. I think I had 100 copies. I'm not sure how many are in the room. If everybody got a copy, you can refer to those. If you don't have a copy, you can access the code on your cell phone. So that's available to you. In terms of the code, it is identified as there's the AICP Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, the ethical principles in planning, then the ethics case of the year is available on that site, ethics and planning toolkit, and the ethics code of ethics and professional conduct certificate is also available. The AICP code consists of 5 areas. A is the aspirational principles, which is the responsibility to the public and client, employers, employees, and professional colleagues. The rules of conduct. There are 26 rules to which AICP members are held accountable. And then there are advisory opinions, informal advice, formal advice opinions, and the annual report. And then complaints of misconduct and the procedure to go through any complaints that you may have or that may arise from a situation, and discipline for members. In terms of the AICP ethical principles, there are, number 1, the service to the public interest, maintain high standards of integrity, proficiency, and improve planning competence are involved in the guidelines for those who participate in the planning process. That's not just AICP, but these are principles that would apply to anyone involved in the planning process, such as a planning commission, a zoning board, or what have you, in terms of their involvement in the planning program. Actions regarding the ethical code. There is a process that is involved if you want to take any actions that you believe are inappropriate or in violation of the code. Filing a complaint of misconduct can be filed by anyone, but only against an AICP member for having allegedly violated a rule of conduct. You can seek informal advice if you don't want to. You can only go that far. So, well, wait a minute, I'm not ready to file a complaint. Yeah, I'm just not sure that this is an ethical on the up and up. So you want to seek informal advice, which I've been involved in a situation that involved that, and to get ethical advice. It's non-binding, not in writing. James Peters, who is the ethical officer, will provide that for you. And seek an advisory opinion from the Ethics Committee, which is provided in writing, but only on selected unresolved issues. And then this is on your phone, if you go to that site, under actions regarding ethical conduct, is the form that you could use to fill out to make a formal complaint. Last year, this gives you a little bit of insight into what's been happening around the profession. Last year, there were 5 cases that were dismissed. In other words, there were no preliminary charges filed. 3 cases were dismissed after a preliminary charge is filed. There were 7 cases that were settled, and all AICP credential misuses were involved in that. And then there were no disciplinary actions taken in any of these situations. And this gives you a sort of a listing of the cases that were actually filed. And consistently, the number one situation is involves honest and fair dealing with people. And you can see the list that's there of all the types of cases, ethical cases. And here's the distribution of those cases. Interestingly, I thought it was interesting that Florida is number 1 in terms of the cases. Well, what's going on here?
We have more AICP.
We have what?
We have more AICP.
I don't know. Not in California. And I don't know in terms of, is it the growth we're experiencing? Is it the pressures? Is it the political environment? I don't have an answer for that. I just thought it was interesting that.
Or is it people actually raising cases?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it obviously is people, the number of people raising cases. Henry, you have a comment on that?
Number, includes inquiries also. So that's some of the things.
Yes, it does. This is all inquiries and cases. Yes. Yes.
That's a good
So which is a good thing. I guess the bad part is we're number 1, but the good thing is we're more conscientious of what we're doing, and so we're making inquiries to get the right answer. So that's the good side of it. So we're going to get into, and these may look familiar if you've attended this session in the past. The names are different, but these ethical scenarios these are real situations. The names have been changed, of course, but they're based upon, and when you get into these scenarios, you'll find it interesting because thinking about, these are real situations based upon what, an inquiry or something that happened through, it was either last year and through the first part of this year that these scenarios are based on. So they're not just made up, but there's enough that is fictional that hopefully you wouldn't be able to identify the situation. So we're going to get started here. I don't know if y'all want to come up here or I can pass. Okay. So we're going to start with Sylvia.
Thanks, Merle. You know, when
whenever I see that map that he showed, I always worry about that number because I always see it being so much higher than the rest of the region and the rest of the state. But I try to put that same good spin that you just did, Henry, in the sense that, you know, we're always, you know, we see something and we say something. Yes, these are real cases, and as Merle mentioned, enough has been changed to make them anonymous. But when I read this one at first, I thought, oh my God, this actually kind of happened to me in some different circumstances a few years ago. So the case here is about Jane. She is an AICP planner who runs a small consulting firm, and she, as a sub-consultant to a larger firm by the strange name of Gargan, worked on a comprehensive plan for Hudson County. The comp plan won an APA award recently, and the larger firm, Gargan, has been actively promoting the project at national and state planning conferences, and I'm sure on their promotional materials. At the same time, the chief planner for Gargan, Marion, here, has been telling the firm's subcontractors, which include Jane's firm, that they are not permitted to mention the plan on their own marketing materials. Marion says that this is because the contract was to Gargan, to her firm, and therefore the credit should go to them and not to the Substack contributors. So just to kind of put a spin on this, in the case that kind of this brought to mind for me was an award that we submitted for a plan a number of years ago, and the client that we submitted for, when the award word of the award being bestowed came back, they were very excited, and they came to the conference with us, and they received the award and refused to let us even stand in the picture with them. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but anyway, let's see what the questions are. Is this situation that I just described, or maybe even mine, appropriate behavior on the part of the lead consultant? Could Marion, the AICP planner for Gargan, be subject of a potential ethics misconduct complaint based on that behavior? What do you all think? I'd love to hear what you all think about this. Yes, I see a hand there.
Depends on what the contract was between Guardian and the subs, I would say. And if it explicitly said that they're giving up their right to market,
Giving up their right to market.
then it would be appropriate. If not, then it's inappropriate.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Anyone thinks differently?
In the contract, somebody says all the products you produce for that, the sub to the big firm are
The
owned
property.
by the bigger firm. Probably
Right.
the same way. It does depend on what the contract says.
Okay. Does everybody agree with that? Yes, I see another hand there.
There's another provision about not misrepresenting experience, and Marion's firm, if they claim that they were the sole authors of the work, could be construed as misrepresenting that they did that solely without the assistance of, I'm sorry, I can't remember the other firm.
Yes. We don't know the name of the other firm. Maybe it's Jane, whatever. Yeah, Jane and Associates.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else? Come on, come on. Yes, I know I could count on you.
So we're talking about contractual responsibilities and limitations. Those that are the private side, you are aware that the public side always imposes extraordinary insurance and liability responsibilities on the prime.
Mhm.
And in many cases, doesn't impose those same obligations to the subcontractor. So in effect, the prime, the larger firm in this example, is assuming responsibility of the same. I mean, I think it is a legitimate claim that it is their work product. Now, whether or not that's a legitimate claim versus an ethical situation, I think remains to be discussed.
Okay, yeah,
There are frequently situations where a local government will use a continuing services contract, and that continuing services contract will use a sub. And the only role in the larger firm is to simply process the payment and do everything. Like they have zero role in the actual planning effort, and you have to look at, is that the relationship under which the work was done for the county?
that's true.
And in which case, Darkan did zero work other than make sure the smaller firm got paid.
That's true. That's the case in some instances. You're right. Yeah. It is true. I will just jump in, and it's true that for us in the private sector, we often see contracts where the client specifically states that any work produced by the consultant, and that includes sub-consultants, is the property of the client, right? But typically also there are clauses that allow the consultant, and hopefully that includes the sub-consultants, because then that's in the contractual relationship between the prime and the sub-consultants, the ability to use the product only for marketing promotional purposes. So anyway, do we have any other opinions, any other insights into this? Or should I? Yes, I see another hand.
Well, I think for the sub-consultant, if there are specific portions that they took the lead on, I think it would be appropriate for them to highlight that in the resume or marketing materials. But whether or not that's an ethics violation, I'm not so sure, because, the prime consultant has a responsibility towards their consulting firm.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Yes.
Is Miriam taking credit, though, publicly for what Jane did?
That is a good point, and we don't have enough context in the case to know that. And typically, these case studies here don't give us a lot of that additional information that would allow us to know all the circumstances. But that is certainly a consideration. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's something about the arrangement of relationship between the sub and the primary contractor, wherein in the public sector, or I guess a private firm, the supervisor, the lower level employees, and then the CEO or head of government, everyone drafts, and finally it's someone else that puts their name on it, and that person takes the responsibility and vets everything.
Right.
I don't know how that fits into the scheme, but it's, that last person is the one that.
Yeah. It's true. Yes, I see.
There's another issue in this, which is that the subcontractors are usually the firms that provide the DBE, MBE, SBE, the disadvantaged business enterprise
Yes.
line items for that contract for that county or municipality. So if that is true for these contracts where Jane is not being recognized, then are they adequately counting the DBE credits and the relationship between the prime and the subcontractor?
That's true.
Another avenue to consider.
Yes. And if Jane is a business enterprise that has that minority status of some sort, and she's not able to claim the project or parts of the project as part of her portfolio, then she's having her business hurt as well, right? Yeah, that's a very good point. Anyone else? Yes.
On the rules of conduct, number 17 says we shall not use the product of others' efforts to seek professional recognition or acclaim intended for the producers of the original work. That
Yes.
seems to have some relationship to this.
That absolutely, and we're gonna go through the sections that do apply, and that's one of them, as a matter of fact. So I'm gonna go on to the next set of questions, but actually, just concern exactly the situation that happened to me, in which Dan, who is the county planner, told Gargan that they could not take credit, they could not promote it as their own. So, is this ethically appropriate? We kind of talked a little bit about that in terms of the contractual relationship, but as Owen said, legal doesn't always mean ethical, right? Okay. What do you think? Any other insights into this particular situation? Yes.
Kind of a repeat, but I would kind of think the same thing in this situation. If the contract between the county and the contractor explicitly stated that the contractor entered into the contract knowing that they weren't going to be able to market the project, then I think it's both legal and ethical because both sides agree to this.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That's the point. And somebody said, I can't remember who brought up just the sub-consultant being able to at least take credit for the parts of the project, not for the entire project obviously, but just for the parts of the project that they contributed to. And it reminded me of something else. I'm sure that many of you here, particularly those of you who interview young planners right out of school, may have seen the situation once in a while. I think that this is something that I emphasize to young planners and students as they go into the marketplace when they present as part of their resume or their portfolio projects in which they were part of a team. They have to make sure that they specify that that was the case and show the parts of the project that they were responsible for and not to make it appear as they were the author of the entire project, right? Okay, so let's just move on into the particular ethical issues. So from the Code of Ethics, in the principles section of the code, number 3C says that we shall describe and comment on the work and views of other professionals in a fair and professional manner. Then in the rules of conduct, we have number 10, which says that we shall neither deliberately nor with reckless indifference misrepresent the qualifications, views, and findings of other professionals. So that is an ethical issue. Number 12, we shall not mistake our education, experience, training, or other facts which are relevant to our professional qualifications. So somebody claiming sole authorship of the work that was contributed to by a number of different individuals or groups would fall under this. Number 17 is the one that the gentleman brought up. What is your name, I'm sorry? Adam brought up. We shall not use the product of others' efforts to seek professional recognition or acclaim intended for producers of original work. And then number 25, we shall neither deliberately nor with reckless indifference commit any wrongful act. This is like the overall catch-all, whether or not it's specified in the rules of conduct. Any other comments before I pass on to the next scenario, which Val is going to take over? Anyone else has any other thoughts on this? Okay.
Sylvia, I think somebody over here brought up what I think is one of the most important points, and that is to what extent is a firm acting as though they have expertise they don't have. That goes to that, misstating qualifications and seeking professional recognition. If your firm really doesn't have certain qualifications, but uses someone else's work to act like it does, I think then you're really
right. Because typically, as a consultant, when you bring sub-consultants in, is to complement the skill sets that you may not be able to offer the client, right? And so I think that's a very good point, and it goes to number 12 in particular.
I'm sorry, did we determine whether or not the ethical breach happened or not?
We never do at the end.
We're not qualified to do that.
But I do think that's why I focused in on that one issue, was because to the extent that someone, like we said, we don't have all the details on this, so you have to kind of say, well, what if this or what if that? And if this were the case, maybe there's a breach, and if that's the case, maybe there's not. If they are acting as though that was their work and they don't have that expertise, there's a difference between a misstatement of what you've done and just not letting someone else take credit for it. Those are kind of two different things. And the not letting someone else take credit for it may not quite be fair, but if the contract says it, you probably haven't committed a breach. But it just depends on the circumstances why we can't always say. Yes.
So I have a related question. Sometimes consulting firms keep a database of their previous projects for marketing purposes, and will print out the list of here's projects that we worked on in the past that are similar to the one that is out on the street right now. If they are identifying projects for which the key staff have left the firm, do they have a responsibility to no longer include them in their marketing materials?
We've had this discussion on the ethics committee. I'm still serving on the ethics committee, and I think there's a difference of opinion among people on that. I think most of us that were on the committee at the time we discussed it felt as though that was not an ethical thing to do, to actually promote your firm with something where you have nobody anymore who could do that work. On the other hand, is it a kind of a violation of a rule of conduct? Maybe not, but we didn't think it was the correct thing to do.
Well,
Yes.
something. I think what you just said is correct, but there's a difference between a firm where employees that did a project have left, but there are still people who do the same kind of work, or that the company still has the same practice or the same kind of specialty, and the ability to offer that service is part of the portfolio, even though the employees that may have contributed to that project may not be there anymore.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, we really don't have anybody who does that work, but we're going to continue to offer the service regardless.
Yeah, and
Even
that
though
was
we don't
the
have
scenario
space.
we were looking at, was where there was no one left at all. So I agree with that. Okay, so let's see. Which way do we go here? Okay, so we're on to another scenario, where Catherine's a newly hired planner with the town of Worcester, having just received her master's degree. And one of her jobs is to respond to Freedom of Information requests. So she gets a Freedom of Information Act request from an advocacy group seeking data from an affordable housing study that the town recently completed. This poor woman. So her supervisor, who's not an AICP planner, tells her not to comply with the Freedom of Information Act request, even though a recent state court ruling requiring local communities to disclose this type of information has come out. She also knows that her supervisor has recently deleted a bunch of the information so that people can't get their hands on it. So, okay, you're newly hired, your boss has done this stuff and told you how to respond. What should she tell her boss? And should she provide the remaining information to the advocacy group. Got somebody back there?
Well, in my opinion, she should do what her boss told her to do because she has an obligation to her immediate supervisor to act as she was told. Now, that being said, she has the opportunity to either bring it up to someone else or bring it up to her HR department that she believes that these actions were unethical, but she's complying because she was directed to do so. Otherwise, there's some potential for insubordination for not carrying out the duties she was told to do. Or she could not act until she finds out whether her actions would be insubordination or not. That's my
Okay, could everybody hear that? Okay. Henry?
I think rule number 2 and 1 to play. This appears to be an illegal act, not basically fail. Also provide clear, accurate information, particularly when it's required by law. So, when it's an illegal act and violates the rules, you have an ethical obligation as an AICP planner to try to conform it.
Okay, so you said you have an ethical obligation because it's within the illegal act not to provide it, so you have to try to comport to it. So I guess the question becomes, how do you try to comport to it? And look at right here.
I was in a similar situation before I was in AICP, but my boss wasn't trying to get me to do anything illegal. He just didn't know what the statute was. So I just said to him, listen, I don't think what you're asking me to do is legal, and I put it in a little email form to make it easy for him, and I presented the statutes, and I said, therefore, based on this information, I believe that the right course of action is X, Y, Z. And then he's like, oh, okay, and it was,
Did y'all hear that? Okay.
You refer them to the county or city attorney.
County or city attorney, and hopefully you've got one who was unlike the first one I worked with that said, I don't get involved with stuff like that. Let's see.
I have more of a question where the boss, the guy, deleted some of the data. And then the second question is, should she provide the missing data? Doesn't that set her up? I mean, how can she, unless she could get the original data set complete? So she can't really fill in the holes. I would think that would be setting her up.
Okay, that's a good point. If she provides incomplete information, where does that put her?
Well, no, she's trying to fill the holes.
Oh yeah, she's not going to be able to fill the holes, right? It's gone. Yes.
I kind of agree with some of the other things that were said. I think that she would probably want to explain to her boss both her ethical obligations for her AICP status and his legal obligations to provide this information, and try and figure out what is driving him, what's compelling him to want to delete that data in the first place, and probably offer some solutions to that as well. Offer to talk to IPs or restore the missing data, and kind of come up with a game plan on how they can approach whatever this issue is that's scaring him so bad, but explain that there's an ethical and a legal obligation to provide it.
You're such a good, compassionate person. Somehow, not that I disagree with you, but I just love the rosy glasses.
So she's recently got a degree. She's green. She's not got any experience. Would one of the appropriate first steps for her would be to take advantage of the connection with the ethics officer and say, hey, I'm brand new in this, and here's my situation. I don't want to go into this fight alone because I don't want to lose my career. I don't want to do anything illegal. I don't want to lose my job. What do? I need you in this fight with me, and take advantage of the fact that, hey, here's my decades of experience as the ethics officer.
I think that's a great suggestion. Y'all hear that? First call ethics officer. Yes.
Is there a question missing though, in that she knows that the data was deleted? Doesn't she have an ethical obligation to then report that back?
Well, that is really one of the questions, I think. Yes. Yes.
It's her obligation, the way it's set up, is that this new planner's obligation is to provide typically a new planner is not like contacting directly the agency for that information. She would be responsible for giving this information to a supervisor, who would then be responsible for giving the information to whom the request came in. I find it a little, and I don't mean to be offensive, I find it a little implausible that Catherine, rosy cheeked new planner, is, sending whatever she thinks is appropriate to send to the agency directly.
I think that's good. I think that's a good point.
Because
Yeah.
typically, when you receive a request like this coming through your PIO or your county attorney, and they're blasting everybody and saying, don't give it to your supervisor, that entity is saying, give it to me, and I will determine what is legally our responsibility as a county or city or something like that to provide, because there are certain aspects of information which may be what the supervisor deleted that we're not responsible to report.
Right. So a new planner probably needs guidance on that sort of thing. And actually, it's interesting because she did get guidance from her supervisor that said, don't give it to him. And I think the situation she's in is saying, she's thinking, I don't understand how I cannot give it to him. And then, you get to this issue of, is she sort of competent at this level of her career to know exactly how all that works? And
I hate to say that I think if you take a job as a professional planner, you're down, you may be down. You're bound to do the right thing in this case and push out whatever the information was through the freedom of information request, and recognize the boss is the wrong thing if you have to lose your job. Oh well.
I think we all have to agree that sometimes you have to lose your job. There was somebody over here. Yes, right there in the back.
Oh, I was gonna ask, did she overstate her credentials in getting her new job? How did she become an AICP without having a job?
Didn't say first job.
Yes.
And I'm sort of assuming we're talking about Florida law here, which I know isn't necessarily built into the hypothetical, but in Florida, there would be a custodian designated for the agency. And I think everybody's sort of agreeing she's got to go report this to somebody, but it might very well be that the custodian of the records is the person to go consult with. And part of the issue here is there are exemptions to public records laws. The city or county attorney may have already made some determinations, so it's not necessarily up to her to figure out what's deliverable and what's not. She really needs to go to the person who's in charge of that.
Okay, so I think what we're hearing is she's definitely got an ethical responsibility here. And it seems fairly cut and dry, but on the other hand, there's an acknowledgement that even though you're right, she shouldn't have gotten AICP, she should have some level of experience sometime. But she's obviously newly hired in green. And, what is her best course of action here as she moves forward to make sure she doesn't violate some of these responsibilities? So there's a lot of different, principles of planning and the ethical principles of planning, the AICP Ethics Code's principles and rules of conduct that apply here. And it all revolves around, making sure that we give citizens the information that they need, that we get information out to the public in general. And then under the AICP Ethics Code, the principles of seeking social justice by working to expand choice and an opportunity for all citizens, exercising independent professional judgment, so she can't just say, well, you know, I don't have to worry about this because I was told to do it. That's always, you know, the start of a problem. And accepting the decisions of the client or employer, unless in the course of action is plainly illegal or unethical. So those are all things that apply in terms of the ethical principles of planning that apply to everyone, should apply to everyone who's working in planning, and then the principles that we have for AICP planners. And then under the AICP Ethics Code, we shall not deliberately or with reckless indifference fail to provide adequate, timely, clear, and accurate information on planning issues clearly applies. Not accepting an assignment from our client or employer when we know it's going to be illegal or in violation of the rules, and then there's the catch-all, you know, wrongful act. So from my perspective, in looking at this, as a first-time planner, I would not recommend that the first thing she do is just shoot the stuff out, regardless of what she's been told. It's like, screw you, I'm gonna say, you know, don't do that. What I do think is that she has an obligation to really push hard on this and start off probably trying to educate her, you know, her boss, make sure that they understand why she's got to do it. Make sure they understand that she actually can't just let it go because it's, you know, it would not comply with the conduct of the ethical principles. Then I think several people mentioned there's a lot of people you go to in this kind of a circumstance. You can go to the city attorney if you've got one that will deal with it. A lot of them will. You can go to her boss if you need to. You can go to HR. There's a lot of people in these processes you can go to. And she may get in trouble. She may lose her job over doing that. But again, like you said, oh well, sometimes you have to do that. But I think the point that was made here that I think really is a good point is that a newly minted planner does not always understand all the ins and outs of the law. And so ultimately it should not be this person's absolute responsibility. It should be the responsibility of her supervisors, the town attorney, and so forth, to say yay or nay, as long, and this is my opinion, as long as she has vigorously promoted it and has not herself refused to provide it. In other words, she's kicked it up the chain with the necessary work done. I personally don't believe that she would be found guilty of a violation of the rule of conduct. That's my opinion. Any other thoughts or questions? Great. Let's see. Great.
I'm not sure how I got this subject, but we'll take it from there. Marion is a planning consultant approached by two staff planners. They tell her that Dan, AICP, who's planning director in Hudson County, has made unwanted sexual comments to each of them at APA chapter events. Dan is also an APA chapter officer. Before I go on to it's a rather simple statement compared to the other ones, I just want to say something for all of us to think about, especially the younger planners. I entered the workforce at age 17 in the late 60s. The basic standards of behavior were taught to my generation by the generation before. And I will tell you, it was very rare to have women in a professional position in 1967. I don't even know if they had policies on harassment like that. When I think back, and as I was looking at this, of the kind of things that went on in offices and things that happened, it's almost unbelievable to think that that could happen, today, but it still does. But it was basically, accepted behavior on a day-to-day basis. And things have changed so much, you really have to think about, before you say something or do something, the context of where we are now versus what you might have learned when you were younger about things. Again, the workforce was a very different thing. It was very male-dominated, by more middle-aged men from a different generation, really, that had totally different standards. And I'm going to give you an example of how insane it was at that time. I had a friend that applied for a job, a female, and she got basically a lecture from the person hiring her, stating all the things she needed to be careful of the behavior of the men in the office. And he ended up the interview by telling her, and laughing, he goes, "And I'm the worst one of all." I mean, can you imagine that happening now? I just, but this is the kind of stuff. And I know younger people, it's hard for you to imagine that. But it was a very different world then. This was all starting. It was the beginnings of women coming into the workforce. I remember that. It was my generation kind of that was doing that, but the standards that existed there. And I think about things my wife went through when she started working in the early 70s. It was unbelievable the questions a boss or somebody in an authority position could ask people. One of the things I remember she was asked was to make sure that she wasn't, because she was newly married, planning on getting pregnant because he didn't want to hire anybody, that might have to take off too much time. I mean, this was just accepted behavior, and there was no HR department, I don't think, to even go to and complain about things like that. So we are in a different world, and you have to think a lot, about your behavior. And, again, we come up, and I've watched society change tremendously in my lifetime. But is still an issue, but the rules are different now, and obviously in the last 5 years we've even seen more changes. So, moving on. Does Marion have any obligations under the AICP Ethics Code?
She's a consultant, right?
Yes. Yes, she's a consultant, approached by 2 staff planners, and they
work for her.
Right, and evidently this Dan guy, the planning director of the county, made unwanted sexual comments to them.
No, they don't work for her, they work for him, don't they?
They work for him.
Yeah, they work for him, I'm sorry, yes, right. So 2 of the staff planners go to the consultant, right. And this is clearly based on her being the AICP and that thing. So who would like to tackle that first question and give me their opinion of what they think her obligations are? Yes.
So, I have, I'm president of my little neighborhood association, and one of my board members had some issues with, when new board members came in, he was pretty cozy. And somebody really jumped on him and it and all, and it forced me to say, to address it. And so what I did is I took the guy, in the back room, and I said, look, this is not gonna be okay. And I noticed at the last meeting with the new board member, he was very polite, he shook her hand, done. He still gave me a kiss on the cheek, but that's okay. So I think step 1 is Marion and Dan ought to just go have a talk, and she should ask him, what he thinks about this and how does he want to move forward. Because she is, after all, a consultant, and she's actually working for him just as those girls are working for him.
Yes.
I think that she may want to talk to Dan or the chapter president if she feels that would be appropriate, but I don't think she really has an obligation to. I think that probably she should just go directly to the AICP Ethics Committee, talk with someone there, and then file a complaint. And probably talk with the county HR director or someone in a position similar to that as well, and file a complaint with them as well, because it's not only an ethics violation, it's a legal violation.
So you think she should file a complaint based on the staff members that work for Dan?
Yes, I thought it was Dan. It's Dan's staff.
It's Dan's staff.
Yeah, it's Dan's staff and she's the consultant.
Are Dan's staff AICP?
They don't say.
Okay. If they're AICP, I would file a complaint against them. If not, I would just talk directly with the county.
Well, it wouldn't be
For
against them.
For
Okay, Dan is harassing his staff.
Staff.
And they went to the consultant and complained that our boss is harassing us basically and making sexual comments to us, even though they don't work for her. This is putting the burden on her because she is under the AICP Code of Ethics.
Okay. So
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, well then, yeah, she should still probably encourage them, Dan's staff, to file their own complaints. But I think she should talk to the ethics committee as well, to try to get some advice and try to help them along with whatever they should be going through. So that if they don't have the courage to reach out directly themselves, she might be able to coach them with some additional insight into the process.
Yes, in the back.
This absolutely is covered under the Code of Ethics in Section B of the Rules of Conduct. And number 25, we shall not deliberately nor with reckless indifference commit any wrongful act here or not specified in the Rules of Conduct that affects adversely on our professional ethics. One person committing an act of sexual harassment against another planner is every planner's responsibility. Anything we do individually or as a group reflects on all of us. It's wrongful whether it's a planning act or not. So she definitely got to report it.
Yes.
I'm not sure she does have to report it because unless she witnesses sexual harassment, it's hearsay. I think she should speak to the two people that made the complaint and ask if they would like to proceed with any action.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And you could, if he's intelligent, she's intelligent, he either has this as a continuing problem or else he just kind of screwed up one time. He just was outside his bounds and he'll get it together, and then he can go forward, he can apologize to the girls, he can say, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But you don't want to create this whole major nightmare when it may not have been that big of a deal. It may have been perceived as a big deal because, like you say, we're in a different lifetime now. But, if everybody should go watch, Mad Men? Yeah. That's a helpful thing to watch.
No.
To understand the context we come from.
Yeah.
You can't, you're saying no because we have to change the world each step. I don't know. I just think that, you have to be somewhat realistic.
I have to say, Mad Men, when I watched it, I thought, oh my God, this is exactly
what I lived
the
through.
way it was. It was like a shock because you don't think about that all the time, and I realized this is exactly.
I've been there and
what
done
happened.
that.
Ray?
Yeah.
In real life, is Dan as creepy as the cartoon?
Could be.
Sounds like
it.
It's not a realistic depiction.
Let's see what they say. Yes.
Most contracts at every metropolitan or TPO in the country has a Title VI, Title VI, civil rights compliance statement on every document. Every public notice says you're following your civil rights language. This is a civil rights violation, so it is a big deal. If Marion can't talk to the ethics coordinator or HR, there is somebody in the realm of the EEOC or your Title VI coordinator for your county, your city. There's somebody you can talk to about violations of civil rights, including sexual harassment.
Yes.
But we still don't know whether these are true, the accusations are true. Marion was told this. So the obligation is really on the two employees to make the charge.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, going to your second question, should you talk directly to Dan? There is always the risk that if he knows who's complaining about him, he can retaliate against them. And then from there, I guess we can go back to the question, is it Marion's responsibility or the employee's responsibility to report it? But again, when we say, should you talk directly to Dan, it depends on his personality and who he is. And if he is as creepy as that cartoon.
I'm gonna, before we go to the two, this is a very interesting thing to watch this conversation because I see the generational breakdown in the comments. And I'm gonna tell you, we're probably in the same generation. When we were younger, there wasn't things to go to. You had to figure out how to solve these problems without structures in society kind of doing it for you, or there was nobody to go and sue or file sexual harassment and all that. You had to figure out a way interpersonally to work this out, and what you said, is exactly what would happen. And it's a different world. It's probably hard for my generation to think of solving things by going to someone else. There wasn't anybody else for me to go to when I was 25 years old. There was no structure to help you, so you had to figure out how to survive with the bully or the harassment or whatever went on. So, it is a different world, and we have different ways of solving problems now, and obviously we're going in the right direction, but it's just everybody has a different view, I think. Yeah.
I just want to put out there that
Sure.
the whole, I'm almost 40, so, so when I first started working, I got my butt grabbed and I got cornered and the whole 9 yards. So it's getting older and fatter was great for me. But the whole idea that, it wasn't like that when I was little. Cell phones weren't there, you can use a cell phone. Computers weren't there, you can use a computer. You can't use that whole, it wasn't like that when I first learned it. Come on, we all have to change. But I don't think that's
That's not what I was saying.
No, I know, but I'm just
I said that you need to be aware of the changes in society, because I can tell you, if you behave in a certain way, you don't think about it sometimes. You don't, you might use a word that's totally inappropriate now. The word gay means something totally different now than it did then. It was something else in the 50s. It was just happy,
And if you're our age, you won't even know you used the inappropriate
Right,
word, because
right.
something like sick is a good thing now.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But you didn't come right But I'm just going to say that, unfortunately, you said, and I know this is true, and I was a big fan of Mad Men, by the way. I love that program, but I was horrified every time that I saw what it was. And for a woman of my age who are just a little older than you, but probably younger than you, no offense.
I won't ask you.
My point is that I hope that we've come to a point where we can do more than just survive a situation.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I agree.
Because I suspect that it was either you just really kind of survived and you just kind of took whatever you were given, or you left. And those were your only two options. So
I think a lot of people didn't leave because they didn't really have a choice. That's just the way things were. I'm not saying it's good. When I watch Mad Men, yes, I'm appalled by the stuff that went on, but I think this really did go on.
So I just wanted to emphasize what the lady over here said, because I think that's very important in this particular case scenario, is to respect the women who were approached may have thought they were telling her that in confidence, and they could be retaliated against. So she has got to, before she does anything else, she's got to go back to those women and make sure that they are okay. She can help them do it, or she could conceivably do it herself, but not without their permission.
Right.
And one more thing that she might do is I don't know, maybe she's a resident of this county. Maybe she could find a way to suggest to the county that they might want to provide training to their employees on what harassment looks like, so that it's a little bit clearer, maybe both to Dan and to his staff people, about what the lines are and when a line is being crossed, and what their recourse is if somebody thinks a line is being crossed.
There's something that nobody has really brought up, and that is the fact that Marion is a consultant also, and she could also be retaliated against. I mean, I suppose, you know, if she had a very friendly relationship with Dan, Quibi Dan, that she could go to him and talk to him on a, you know, sort of a friend-to-friend basis. But, you know, still, I think it's a pretty dicey situation that she was told about this as an outsider. So.
Right. Okay, here's the two rules that would relate to them. They're kind of general to me, but we shall protect and enhance the integrity of our profession. Then number 25, we shall neither deliberately nor with reckless influence commit any wrongful act, whether or not specified in the rules of conduct, that reflects adversely on our professional fitness. It's kind of gray, but you know, it fits. And this is certainly something that is an issue in the workplace now that we all need to be aware of.
So, Ray, the ethics committee is considering the possibility of amending the code in the future, and one of the questions is, you know, what's not covered in the code, and one question is, how many of y'all think that this particular issue should be specifically covered in the code versus just under generalized? So specifically covered in the code, sexual harassment. And how many people think that we should just rely on the general principles that are, or rules of conduct? So there's a few. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say something here. You know, this is calling you and I'm wondering nothing about the Christian law. The only thing that worries me as hearing as an AICP issue or conduct, it really is not. I mean, it's a social issue. And I don't want an AICP woman to say, oh gosh, I gotta follow the rule. No, this is about what's right. If you're uncomfortable, then it's bad. Then go see HR. And that's why I don't think there should be a specific thing in the code to relate to that. Let law guide itself.
Because if she weren't AICP, she should still do something about it.
Well, that's the whole reason I thought it was not covered by the code. I recall discussions a number of years ago, when I think I had with Paul Farmer, where the indication was it's not in the code because it's covered by law.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was not seen as confusion a little bit across that, you know, both ways. It already is an illegal activity, sexual harassment or worse. I don't know if Val can verify that or not, about why it's not in the code currently.
Well, I think I think it's interesting what you're saying, because I had not heard that sort of story, you know, from Paul. I think that it used to be in the code, I believe. I believe there was something in the code way back. Interestingly enough, in spite of the fact that, you know, in the past it was not considered to be as big of an issue. But the committee's just trying to, you know, certainly is concerned and is trying to figure out whether it should be in or not be in. And this is the kind of, you know, discussion we just need to have.
I thought it was taken out of the code specifically because more modern law started to cover it more appropriately. And that's why I thought it was appropriate to take it out. I don't know if you've got it.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point. But on the other hand, gift giving is also covered by a lot of laws.
Yeah.
And yet we have it in the code because we think it affects people's, you know, perception of planners and our ability to do our jobs correctly. So I don't think just the fact that there are laws about it means.
Right. No, I think that was just that was the discussion I had one time. I can't remember the forum for it. I'm pretty sure it was with Paul Farmer.
I see some hands and we're going to get to them. I'm just going to say, just to interject into the discussion, that this same issue is being considered right now, and I believe it is going to be addressed in codes of ethics by AIA and ASLA, and so we're not the only ones who are grappling with how to address these issues or not in our ethical code. And for myself, I think that just like they are doing, I think that we probably should. Issues of harassment are apparently much more rampant in some of our allied professions, which still tend to be a little bit more male-dominated than ours. So anyway, I saw a hand way in the back. I think you in the last row. Did you want to? Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to your comment about there's already laws on this, but the moderator kind of made my point that there are a lot of things that we have laws for that
Okay.
this code of ethics is really just the standards that we hold our professions to.
Yeah.
It's really important for us to have guidelines, especially because there are still even a lot of departments that are very male dominated. Ethics guidelines to help the women.
Yeah. Okay.
just to be nitpicky and go back to the specific issue, it seems like this scenario was chosen specifically because there is no law that covers it. This is a consultant who was confided in about behavior. She's not covered by the EEOC or by their HR or by anybody. Only the two women
That's
who
true.
were harassed
That's
are
true.
affected by the law and protected by the law.
Yeah.
So as a matter of integrity, this AICP member has integrity is a personal thing. So, it's like, let's leave it to this AICP person's personal integrity and personal knowledge of Dan and personal knowledge of the two women who were affected to make the best decision that she thinks on who the appropriate person to talk to is. But ultimately, legally, it's the two women who are harassed, and they're the only two people who are legally protected.
That's true. That is
So
true.
this is an ethical issue.
Yes. Okay. Here.
I think the reason it should be added back to the code is because the laws tend to establish a minimum standard, and I think our code is establishing a higher standard.
That's also true. Yes. In the back. Yeah.
Yeah, there's two things I want to say. One is that this lady over here and that up there basically covered it. The law has a particular standard that has to be met. Under the AICP ethics is another way for people to be brought to to be required to meet this, to be, if there is a complaint and it doesn't meet the legal standard, at least it meets this standard.
Yes.
That's one. The second thing is, and believe me, I am 100% feminine. But it's not just women that get harassed sexually, and there are probably a lot of guys going, so I want to be forgotten here, I'm not the only one that harassed. So this is not just something that, and it's extremely difficult to get to that level of standard legally.
Yes. Yes.
So
You're
it's
right.
not a matter of, there is a law that covers it, and it is more than ethics and morals, and it's a social issue, it's all of that. But he is quite, in that particular situation, he's AICP, he's held to a standard among his peers that he's not held to in other situations socially.
And let us not forget that he's a chapter officer as well, and
Right.
nobody has really talked about that. Okay, I saw a hand. Yes.
This kind of begs the question of how it would be written into AICP ethics, because from what someone was saying over there is to say, well, we need to judge his character and judge the character of these two women and things like that, and that's still not the case because we aren't necessarily mandatory reporters for sexual harassment and things like that. And to say that we would have to report a rumor that we heard, whether it be true or false, I think would also be unethical to just make us report rumors or things that we've heard. So I still have the stance that it should not be included in our code of ethics.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Wait. Here first, and then you.
I was going to say, one of the items that we've added into our city's handbook as far as addressing harassment in general is that you have to be aware of not just harassment against you, but harassment that you see and observe, and that you are responsible for then reporting harassment on behalf of the people that you see being harassed, because not every employee is comfortable with reporting, and that may be why these women went to her, maybe because she's another lady, they have respect for her, they have the ability to have that conversation with her. Again, I think some of the other things people have said about assisting them and going through the process, but I like the way that our policy was added about, basically being your brother's keeper in a sense, and assisting those who are not able to assist themselves when it comes to harassment.
That's true. That's true. Okay, you. Yes.
I'm probably just echoing a lot of the other concerns that I agree with, but I think that regardless of whether there's overlap in our code of ethics and our rules of conduct between our rules and what's legal or illegal, it's still important to have it in rules of conduct explicitly. I think that it's kind of the same as anything else. We heard a rumor about one of our colleagues taking a rod. We wouldn't just report that immediately. We would use our best judgment. We would try to get to the bottom of it, work with others to see if there's some sort of investigation that can be done and get to the bottom of it. And I think it's important that our AICP credentials mean something. The minimum bar isn't just not a criminal. It's an ethical leader in our field, then they should not have done that in their past. After they've dealt with whatever legal repercussions came their way, they should not be AICP.
Yes, you're right. Yes, over there. You, yeah.
I think if this person had observed it, then they are obligated, but the facts, as I understand them here, are that they were told that something happened. So there's a big difference. If you were told that you didn't witness it, then that isn't her obligation. And there's still an obligation on the people who do experience it, whether they're nervous or intimidated or whatever, so that we don't get in the place we are now, that they speak out to the appropriate people if they do experience it, so it doesn't happen third hand. And that is an obligation. Nobody's comfortable about that, but you need to get comfortable if justice is going to occur.
That's a good point. And something that I just wanted to go back to is the fact that these comments to the staff planners actually occurred outside of the office. They were made at an APA chapter event or events. Does that change the situation?
Yes.
It also doesn't say
Who says yes? Only a few. Who says no? Okay. All right. Any comments? Yeah.
Well, the fact that it happened at APA chapter events makes it a higher obligation on APA and AICP to actually include it. And also with regards to whether or not including sexual harassment in the code of ethics is less about the reporting aspect of it and more about holding people to a higher standard. So it's not so much about, it is both, but it's not so much about whether I see it and I'm not saying anything. The other side of it is, am I holding myself to a higher standard of behavior than what's minimally required by law? And also I just feel like it's much easier to say the victim should come forward, but it's not realistic in many situations, and that's like saying it's just a rumor, innocent until proven guilty, but that is the legal side of things. That shouldn't have a bearing on whether we're including that in the code of conduct.
And I'm going to say that in this particular situation, with the context of it being him a chapter officer and these being chapter events, that actually, in my mind, triggers the ability of these women to go to the ethics officer and make the inquiry and work through that process. And the process that is gone through is actually very lengthy and very thorough, and there is a full investigation. That's why it takes so long. And so, it's not about, just taking somebody's word that this happened. I mean, there's really a lot of robust investigation behind that, so. Anyway, yes,
Quick question. Let's assume they make a complaint, it goes through the investigation, and they do find there was a violation of sanction. Is Marion then, and if it comes up during that investigation that they spoke to Marion and told her, is Marion now subject to being sanctioned because she did not report it?
that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but
I think,
but-
I
No, I
think
can-
that's always a really difficult
It
one,
is.
you know? And I think that it's, that this kind of this particular scenario revolves so much around the reporting versus not reporting thing that we kind of got caught up in all that.
Right.
I think it is a good question, and I can't tell you for sure that she would be. I think a lot of people would say she has an ethical obligation to do something, but the question of whether she would actually be charged with a violation of the code is sort of a different question.
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure on that, but I do think that everybody agrees she has some kind of obligation to do something. Do you want to do another scenario?
I don't think we have time. I mean, I was going to talk to you about another of Jane's situations, but I think we're going to close here. I'm going to give it back to Merle, and I just thank you so much for this really interesting conversation on this topic.
I guess I should have anticipated that this scenario would have resulted in this much discussion, because we didn't get very far in the scenarios. And that's fine, because it was the whole point of this was the dialogue and the discussion and getting you thinking about this. But I just want to point out that there are other scenarios that you can go to the website, the AICP Ethics website, look it up. You can read the other scenarios. They're very, I guess, very much related to probably situations that you've encountered, just like some of these have been already. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you for your attention, your attendance, and your participation. Go forth and make great ethical decisions.